Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series, where we chat about everything leadership, coaching and marketing in aim of adding value to people's lives every Wednesday and Thursday on ebusradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime Series on all your major podcast channels, and to help us grow the channel, please follow, like and share with everyone you can, guys. On today's coaching segment, she's been around before, you know her already. She's the human and talent-centered strategist, executive coach, and agile people advocate, and HR and leadership expert, Anja van Beek. Anja, welcome to our show today. How are you doing?
Oh, good morning, Kevin. So lovely to be back.
Yeah, it's been a while. I'm glad that we could catch up and have a new conversation. And guys, today we're going to have a really interesting conversation, but one that's I believe that is both very close to Anja and myself's heart. And we're going to really sort of unpack a little bit of human-centric leadership, right? And, if you look at just a general sort of overview of what that means is human-centric leadership starts with understanding each employee's feelings, needs, and goals by focusing first on the person instead of the task being done, and the managers demonstrating empathy and desire to create a real win-win situation. And tell, from your perspective, why did you feel that this is a necessary conversation?
Yeah, so Evan, I have to say this is something that's really very, very close to my heart. And the reason why I thought this is important for us to talk about. So if I look at leaders, many that I'm currently working with, but also leaders that I've worked with in the past, is something that I have observed is people are, let's say, leaders are very, very comfortable and very confident when they talk about strategy, when they're talking about geographical expansion or new products that we need to launch. But as soon as we have a look at I don't even want to call it the softer side, let's say on the human side of business, that's where they're sometimes not as confident and they perhaps need a little bit more guidance and coaching. And that is what I have seen over the last few years, that we need to be so mindful and so focused on how do we support our teams to really thrive in the workplace. Because as you say, there's a huge shift from focusing on the team and enabling them versus, so let me just focus on the profit, on making the business work, because what we do know is that it's the people and the team that's really bringing the magic. And if we don't shift our focus to find that balance, we're really in a difficult spot.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I like the fact that you say not soft skills, but rather the human side of the business. And I think that's so important. One of the things that I think also that I just want to share with the audience is McKinsey did a study around, they found that identifying and addressing a pervasive mindset, and, pervasive just being a mindset that isn't in favor of what it is you're trying to put out there. And it's interfering with your goal, your vision, and your drive for the business. But the study found that when they went and worked on an organization's pervasive mindset and really helped them change mindset, they were 400% more likely to achieve in that organization based on the fact that mindset changed, and they made a shift in their mindset. And to me, when I first heard about this information around McKinsey doing something like this, I just thought how unbelievably fantastic as a starting point, right? When you're speaking about human-centric leadership. And, for me, it's always kind of going, where does it start? It starts with me, right? You can't wait for your team to get on board. You can't wait for that person to come, his attitude to come right. It really starts with, what is my mindset saying about my environment? How do I bring myself to this environment? How do I bring myself, my energy, my total self to an environment where I'm not just going to the job because the job is the job and I get paid to do it. I think long gone are those days that we can just simply go to work for the sake of having a job or a title. It really does require us to come with a certain set of sort of a certain mindset to be able to make those changes.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, Kevin. And let me share an example. So I had the privilege to be HR director at a phenomenal organization. And I think why I'm saying phenomenal is because if you have a look at our results from a financial perspective, it was year-on-year growth, double digits. So, I mean, we could tick that box to say, yes, the business is very healthy, very good. But I think what was working very well, and it links to what you've said now, is we had the culture where everyone took ownership and accountability for exactly what you said, that mindset, that attitude, that energy that they came to work with. It's almost as if, think of Sunday evening, and I have a few clients who say, Anja, as soon as it gets to Sunday afternoon, it's almost as if I feel this heaviness on my shoulders because I need to go back to work tomorrow. And how sad is that? But I mean, reflecting back on those years, it was really as if the employees it's my organization. Yeah, I'm the one that will make the difference. And even though they were just, employees and not necessarily shareholders in the business, they did not act that way. They took ownership and accountability for making the change. Now, I think what was working in that point in time, yes, we were a value-based organization. So one of our values was people first. And I think for me, that is where the true difference came in, where when people think of people first, it was not only looking at how do I serve my customers better, or how do I make a difference in the community that we operate, but also how do I serve the internal clients better? How do I collaborate better? But I think first and foremost is how do I bring what energy and what contribution am I delivering in this moment? Yeah, and I think that was the magic. And why I'm saying people nowadays need to be more human-centric is those days are gone. I mean, we've been through a worldwide pandemic. And as you say, through the pandemic, simply because of that sense of loss, people lost their dreams, they lost their idea of ideal workspace, perhaps the idea of an ideal team. So all those emotions of about sense of loss, and we need to form something new. That is why we need to focus so much more on the humans at work.
And as you're speaking, one of the things that sort of the Arbiter Institute of Leadership also speaks about the inward and outward mindset. And I don't know if we've spoken about this before, but it's such a beautiful concept when you really look at the inward and outward mindset, and it explains, how do you show up with at work? Do you have a very inward approach? And how they explain the inward approach is, do I arrive at my job, my workplace, and kind of go, okay, cool. I need this from that person. I need this from that person. And if I can get that team to do this thing, then I can get to what I'm busy with. And immediately it's a very inward focused approach to what I need done and what I need for me to achieve what I need to achieve. And they flipped that on its head and said, but what if you started recognizing at an outward mindset where you could actually see, does this person, as much as I want to achieve what I want to achieve, have I considered that this person has dreams? This person has hopes and wants to achieve and has challenges, and maybe couldn't get to work on time, or maybe because of a difficult relationship they're in. Suddenly, when I'm seeing people as people and not people as objects and what I can get from them, suddenly I've gotten a complete different outward mindset towards how do I win and how do you win? And suddenly we have a win-win conversation, right? And that's a beautiful kind of way of everything you were saying now, like showing up in a different way, and being able to take that accountability, but knowing that when I'm taking accountability and I'm doing this, can I help and, bring my colleague along, or do they need 5 minutes of my time to just have a bit of a pep talk so I can see that I can be there for them as well? Because then I'm having an outward mindset and I'm actually seeing people and not just these objects that I'm getting information and stuff from, to make me look good. It's a complete mind shift that we need to actually undergo to be able to lead as human-centric leaders.
Yeah, and that's such a beautiful point. And the Arbiter Institute is really doing amazing work. I love the workshops that they present on this outward mindset. And I think what I like about that is the link back to agile. Now, we've all spoken about being agile and adaptive and what's needed in the new world of work. And I think to your point, I mean, for me, it was quite interesting. I'm busy with a leadership development program. And one of the first lessons that we've covered, the insight across the board was, I suddenly realized that I need to understand exactly what you said. Looking at that human and understanding, but what are their personal goals? What is it that they want to achieve? Yeah. And not only focusing on this is the business objective, this is the strategy that we want to focus on, and obviously that's very important, it's critical, but see how can we either match or at least just understand. And what those leaders said is, Anja, it's really about me having that one-on-one conversation, really setting aside time to connect with them on a personal basis, and not saying that you need to be best friends or need to solve their personal situations, not at all. I think it's about that remaining curious and getting to know you for who you are, and not only a team member trying to achieve the strategy. Yeah, beautiful. And I think the other thing that you said when you spoke about the outward mindset, for me, it's also about that, how do we span the boundaries? Because so often I see people has a narrow focus and really focusing on their team and what the team or their department needs to achieve. And when we open to expand the boundaries, it's exactly like you say, how can I perhaps support that team? What information do I have to give them in order to make their processes or their projects a lot better? And I mean, that goes even outside organizations, where we not only focus in different departments, but also different organizations in the same industry. And how can we benefit by even adding value to other people in the industry?
Yeah, it's beautiful. One of the things that I did want to share with the audience today is, and I'm sure you know this, maybe in a different frame, but it's called the map is not the territory, right? And what it means is let's just use an example of, I see a colleague, let's call him Dave, for example. To all the Daves out there, we love you, and we just use an example. Maybe Dave is in middle management. He's a colleague. He's intelligent. He's quite shy. He's sometimes very misunderstood. He might have ADD because he doesn't always focus on what's at hand. He's married. He's always late. That's the kind of what I see of the map of Dave, right? But the territory of Dave is that this year Dave's wife has gone through three miscarriages. This year, he's been married for 2 years. His son is autistic. Dave doesn't always feel happy inside, so he tends to be quite sluggish and quite heavy sometimes when he speaks. He's been around in the last 4 years and hasn't been promoted once. Most people don't know Dave's name, right? Essentially, the map is not the territory. We often, as colleagues, as people working in an environment, we see someone's map, and that which we see, we automatically make the assumption that, oh, that's just that, Dave's always late, or, I'm going to have to deal with Dave because so-and-so. And we make up these assumed stories about Dave. But when I sat down with Dave as human to human, and I had a cup of coffee with Dave, and I understood, and I took the time to understand that Dave really his wife's having really bad time. His son's autistic. He hasn't been promoted. He feels really bad. Suddenly I know Dave's territory, right? Mm-hmm. And I think as leaders, we also must know this concept of the map is not the territory. You only know the territory once you go to the territory and you see the person for who they are. And when we have that, the approach of, let me get to know you, let me get to understand you from a human perspective, it's so much easier for me then to say, no, I get Dave, I see Dave, I know the challenges Dave has. So in this context, I can deal with Dave slightly differently than I do with this person, because Dave might be different to Susan, for example, right? And only when I'm actively going through a process like that and I'm aware of that, can I actually show up differently as a leader in my environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that concept where the metaphor of the map in the territory. And I actually want to build on what you said, Kevin, and just add perhaps one step even before that. And I've actually seen that personally yesterday. I was facilitating and the one delegate joined quite late the second morning. And I mean, obviously, I'm taking note of that. And I'm so glad that she could join in the end. And without even noticing that, I was telling myself a story. I mean, you spoke about the assumptions, yeah? And for me, the story that I was telling, yeah, she might not be as committed. I wonder, I didn't even say I wonder why she was late, but I mean, I immediately made an assumption. And then later, when I actually just checked in with her and just checking if she's fine, you know what I've realized? That she had a deadline and she worked until 3:30. That morning to complete her deadline. I mean, she was at work, or not at work. She was in a conference or a workshop on the first day. Then she worked until 3:30. And then she still, came back and completed day 2. And how much of loyalty and commitment is that showing? And again, as you said, that almost immediate perception or assumption or conclusion that myself got to, she's late. And I think the tip or the skill that I want to teach the people is in that moment, even before you're having the conversation. I mean, you said, let's have a cup of coffee. But even before that, just ask yourself the question, but why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person act that way? And you will see what's happening. It's opening up your mind so that when you go to the dialogue, when you have the conversation, it's almost as if you have questioned already those conclusions and assumptions, because obviously that might not be correct. And if you go in and enter the conversation from that viewpoint, I mean, you running into trouble. Yeah. So for me, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is really to open my mind to, I call it the humanizing question. Why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person act that way?
I love that. Yeah, and it speaks to the very next point that I also want people to hear is one of the presuppositions that we live by, from a coaching perspective, is that people are not their behavior. People display behavior, right? And we use this in connection to, it's the same with the Enneagram. People are not their behavior. People are just displaying behavior. There's a root cause to the behavior. And one of the easiest ways to remember this is the intention does not necessarily equal the behavior. And very often we see people's behavior show up in a certain way. It wasn't her intention to be late. She was late because of circumstances, right? Yeah. But what we tend to do, and everyone is guilty of this. Everyone is guilty of this when we don't actually take a step back and go, I wonder what their intention was, right? When someone acts out in a meeting, do I just reprimand them and embarrass them in front of everyone, or do I take a step back and go, that is interesting behavior? You used the word curious earlier, right? And I think that is one of the biggest, most powerful positions for a leader to be in, is to be curious about the people in that environment. Because if you can start recognizing behavior and going, that is interesting behavior, I wonder what the intention is. Suddenly I'm empowering myself to not make the judgment on the behavior, but rather to understand the intention of their behavior. And when I'm doing that, you're automatically showing up as coach. You and I have spoken about, leaders as coach in any case. So, you're automatically stepping into that coach role to kind of go, maybe I should have that one-on-one to really understand what the intention is. I've led this with conversations as well, where someone has a response and I'll go, so I just want to ask, was it your intention to speak to me the way that you just did now in front of the whole group of people? And invariably that person will go, what do you mean? And you'll say, no, you just sounded really angry and you made me feel like I was completely incompetent. And suddenly the person goes, oh my goodness, no, that was not my intention, right? And suddenly that you kind of get that you can actually help people recognize when they do have bad behavior, to kind of consider what was the intention, because then suddenly they're also accountable for their own behavior and they can rectify their own behavior.
Yeah.
And usually we just judge, and that's not useful for anyone.
Yeah. And you know what we need to remember about judgment is, even though we might think, yeah, they don't know because I'm not saying it out loud, I think we do need to remember that that energy of judgment, they do pick up. I mean, if you think of people respecting one another, if there's no respect in the room, that's the only thing that you notice, yeah? It's almost like air. If it's not there, that's the only thing you notice.
Yes.
Very similar with judgment, that even if you think, okay, I'm thinking this, even if you don't say one word, the other person will pick it up. And again, Kevin, just to build on what you mentioned about intent, and this is actually something that we cover in the Crucial Conversations training from the Human Edge. And the reason why people, so let's say myself, just on the flip side, so let's say I'm having a conversation with you and I have a specific intent, and then suddenly the reason for the conversation with you is that I do want you to support you in the way that you handle, difficult clients or challenging conversations with the clients. And then as I'm starting to talk to you, I see that you immediately become defensive. You're at the back foot, and you might say something like, "That's not my mistake. It wasn't my fault," or you're starting to defend yourself.
Yeah.
And that's usually the tip, to see that the person is not in dialogue anymore. They're not having the conversation. And the reason for that is they're feeling unsafe. And I think it brings it back to the intent, because they might question, why are you having this conversation? Yeah. And I think, again, very, very clearly then to clarify your intent, to say, it's not I don't want you to think that I'm highlighting or saying that you always use the wrong words. I do want to support you to feel more confident when addressing these challenging conversations. So also that word intent is so, so important, because on the flip side, people become defensive or withdraw from a conversation if they question the reason, the motivation, the intent of you starting that conversation.
Yeah, and when you're doing this, you're showing up as an authentic leader that is really considering human centricity at the forefront, right? When you're doing all of these things and you're just becoming 10-20% more aware of how it's playing out in this environment. I was doing a workshop with one of my clients the other day, and giving them the challenge of, how do you lead from the heart? How do you bring more heart into this environment? And one of the things, and everyone had their groups, they were discussing it, and eventually one of them said, we're going to, and the head of transformation for this business said, we're going to come up with a campaign to be 10% more kinder to one another. And they're going to run it as like an actual campaign, right? And I thought, what a brilliant idea for people to want to, in that environment, actively and cognizantly go, I haven't seen Anja for the last 2 months yet. Let me go and buy her a cup of coffee, because, I want to instill, and I want people to recognize, because that's who people will follow. They'll follow the leader doing what the leader does, right? And essentially, when I'm cognizant about being 10% more kinder in that environment, imagine if 50% of the organization started doing that, and this kindness attribute, this kindness theme started coming up. I wouldn't be as outward mindset as I usually am. I'd be, or inward mindset. I'd rather have this beautiful outward mindset, bringing kindness to this environment, and really being intentional, like being an intentional leader, and considering, what is my intention essentially. And I think, I just wanted to share that, as a again, from a human-centric position, kindness goes very, very far when you are speaking about intention and you're wanting to make a difference.
Yeah. And you know what is one book that I can recommend? The Kindness Revolution. I haven't read it recently, but it's a super, it's an amazing practical book with lots of case studies and stories, exactly like what you've pointed out now. How can we bring that kindness and really impact the way our business operates? And it can be small things. So yeah, something for the listeners to go and read, The Kindness Revolution. And Kevin, you know what is one thing that I have noticed, and I don't know if you have any tips for the leaders listening to the show this afternoon. So it's all good to have the intent. It's all good to know that, yes, I need to be kinder. I need to have that human-centric focus. I need to change my attitude, my habits of thoughts around the humans. But so often people say, I just don't have the time. It's so busy. There's so much to do. There's so many problems that I need to resolve that it's not a priority to make time. How would you respond to that?
I absolutely believe that there's a number of factors that play into time management and really being aware of your time. I really do believe that people have ownership. They can't let go of their ownership. That's the one thing. So they get stuck into it because they believe that, if I do it, it's going to be done the best way. The first problem with that is you're not empowering your team, you're not delegating to your team, and you're not teaching your team to be leaders, right? So if I'm doing it the whole time and I'm not empowering that person and I'm not getting them to actually show up, right? I'm not empowering that team. So what does that mean? I have less time to do what I need to do. What does that mean? I have less time to lead them and more time to have to fix the fires all the time, right? So it's from a practical perspective, empower people in your team not to show up as employees. Empower people in your team to show up as leaders first. Because when they're leading from their powerful positions and working at their strengths, then I have a bunch of leaders at my disposal and not a bunch of employees that are instruction takers, right? And the second thing that I think that people just dismiss as I think we get so caught up in it is people are having meetings about meetings, right? And there's no agenda. There's no one keeping time and saying, guys, we only have 5 minutes left. No one, like you and I right now, I'm checking the time as we're doing this. We have 3 minutes to wrap this up, right? We literally have to get to a position especially in large corporation. If you're having a meeting, show up with an agenda, make sure the right people are in that meeting. And if there are people that don't need to be there, don't invite them to the meeting, right? Because you're taking away from productivity. So I think it's micro behaviors that have become this wonderful habit-formed way of doing stuff. And you're not actually helping anybody purely based on the fact that you're not delegating and you're not empowering people to lead. Because if you were, right, you would be delegating everything you need to do, and you would be focused on how do I support that leader to be better at their leadership, to be better showing up in an empowered manner, so that I can focus on the future and the vision of where I'm taking this team. People have that skewed.
Wow, you said it so beautifully. And Kevin, you know what I can add to that? What comes to mind for me was that, the 7 habits of highly effective people, and that simple concept of what is urgent and what is the priority. Because so often we want to focus on whatever is urgent, but we need to focus on what is important, yeah? And the important stuff is that making time for the human connection, making time to really understand and support them and help them to be the best, as you said. Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Anja, if you had to sort of leave people with, just one idea or sentiment around, human-centric leadership, what would you leave us with this?
Yeah. So, Kevin, I think my final thought would be that we don't have a choice. In today's world, we need to connect in a different way with ourselves, with our teams, and with the organization. And that means having the human at the center of everything. And I want to give a challenge to our listeners today to try that, to do that. Perhaps you someone that's already embracing that, and take it, then stretch yourself a little bit more, whatever that might mean. But for you to get to know the humans, to understand who they are. And I think you said it so well. Let's start with ourselves and be a little bit kinder, not only to others, but to yourself as well.
Absolutely, I love that. And I want to leave, with a beautiful quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man is one who persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." So go and be there and challenge it, right? Show up in a way that people totally don't expect you to do, and become completely unreasonable to the status quo, because you can bring kindness to the environment. You can cultivate leadership and bring leaders to lead in your own teams. There's so much that we can actually do, and we just need to be more intentional, more cognizant about how we show up. So, Anja, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for having a fantastic conversation. And guys, I must tell you, I'm going to say it, Anja.
Oh, you can?
She totally came to this conversation and said, "Kevin, I'm totally unprepared this morning. But this is coming from my heart." So if this comes from our heart, like, can you imagine what a beautiful, beautiful, insightful, and so much wisdom sitting right there with us. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you for sharing that wisdom with us. So, Anja, thank you so much. Thank you for speaking from the heart. It was beautiful, and I'll chat to you soon.
Thank you, Kevin. It was lovely as always, and chat next time. Goodbye.
Cheers for now. Bye.